What is it?
It's time to go back.
Welcome.
Hey there, welcome back to Generation S. It's a podcast about growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s. Let me put it to you this way. If your childhood Saturday mornings were lit up on TV with a man in a classy gray suit and a really slick red bow tie, this podcast is for you. I'm Dan Kemp, and today I am joined by the host and creator of the Pop Culture Retrospective Podcast and returning guest on the show here, Miss Amy Lewis. Amy, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really great to be back. I think this is the first time that I have reappeared on a show.
Oh, really?
So this is very exciting. Yes, because I know everybody's very busy in the podcast world. Sometimes collaborating on stuff, routinely can be a challenge, but it's very exciting to be back for the second time on this fantastic show.
Absolutely. I am super excited to have you back. And today, so you're joining me for a very specific reason.
Yes.
Today's episode, if you saw in the title, we are essentially remembering Wee Herman, Paul Reubens, who unfortunately passed away a couple of weeks ago. And I actually wanted to do an episode about this last week, but I had already had one recorded about the Barbie movie. So I wanted to get this out as soon as possible. Obviously, fresh on our minds, the death of Paul Reubens after a very short private bout with cancer.
Yes.
And not a lot of celebrities do that, but when they do it, it really hits you. When you have these celebrities that you don't know there's anything wrong, and all of a sudden something comes out, whether they're still alive or they've even recently passed away, that they were privately battling some disease, like Norm Macdonald, another one that comes to mind, or
yes.
Chadwick Boseman from the Black Panther.
Yes.
So it's always rough. But let me ask you, Amy, when you found out about Paul Reubens and his passing away, I mean, what was your first reaction?
My first reaction was I had no idea that he was sick, and it sounds like a lot of his close friends didn't even know. And second of all, I couldn't believe that he was 70 because he always seemed so sort of ageless to me. And I didn't realize that he was, basically my parents' age, because he seemed so youthful and kind of childlike. And that's kind of how I described his character. So it seemed very odd that this sort of, childhood icon of mine, and in my childhood, my sister's childhood was, in his 70s, and was, apparently very sick. So it was just very shocking and surprising and sad. And, you never want to see somebody that you associate with your childhood being, not well and passing away. So it was definitely kind of a shock. But then, I also feel like I haven't really thought all that much about his show in quite a long time, so it was nice to sort of revisit all that. But definitely a shock. How about you?
Honestly, same. I think I was working, and my wife had just came into the office, or came in my room and was like, "Hey, Paul Reubens died." I'm like, "What?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Are you sure?" Because you'll hear about the celebrity deaths that are totally fake or whatever. And so let me just jump on the old Google real quick. And sure enough, he had passed away. And again, it had mentioned he was dealing with cancer privately.
Yeah.
And not a lot of people knew about it. And so I guess he had put out a message right before he passed. I'm paraphrasing, but basically something along the lines, "I'm so sorry, I haven't been active online lately. I've been dealing with some health issues on the back end, but I wish you all well, and I love you." And then very soon after that had passed away. So
yeah. Crazy.
Very sad. Yeah, definitely super bummed. He was a big part of my childhood, not just as Wee Herman, but other movies and TV shows, which we'll talk about today, because that's what we're doing today. We are remembering the good times with Paul Reubens, with Wee Herman. Yes. We're going to talk Pee-wee's Playhouse. We're going to talk the movies, all kinds of stuff. So super excited. Before we get into it, though, Amy, I would be remiss if I did not give you a chance to talk about your amazing podcast that I have also been able to be a guest on, the Pop Culture Retrospective. Would you like to throw in your show plug here?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so I host, produce, write, whatever you want to say it, all job titles for a podcast, called the Pop Culture Retrospective Podcast, which I started in the spring of 2020 as a way to sort of deal with the grief that came along with losing my sister in 2019. So as a way of kind of coping with that, I've decided to revisit a plethora of topics from our childhood and adolescence, everything from Nirvana to Notorious B.I.G. to Missy Elliott to the early days of Nickelodeon, all different topics, things that sort of hit on the things that we were into as kids and watched together and listened to together. So it's been a really fun, therapeutic way to kind of, deal with the loss of my sister, but also, kind of have fun along the way and remembering, kind of like you just said, remembering happy moments and happy times, because there's a lot of really fun stuff to look back on from that era. I mean, I'm sure we're biased, but 80s,
well,
90s,
and
it's good times. It's good times.
Rose-colored glasses for sure, but I mean that's okay. That's what everyone can feel that their childhood was the best, and that's totally fine.
Absolutely,
our audience is going to feel the same way theoretically.
Right.
So,
yes, exactly.
And as far as being able to find the show, it's pretty much everywhere, right? As far as all the major podcast platforms.
Yep, it's on all platforms except for Stitcher, RIP Stitcher. Yes, on all major platforms. Pop Culture Retrospective Podcast. Yeah, say that.
And can also actually find it online. Your website is popcultureretrospective.com.
That is correct. Yes, I did finally get around to having a website for it. So I do blog posts and information about guests that I've had on, all different kinds of information about the greatest, generation of all time, which is the elder millennial / borderline Gen Xer generation. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's that crossover for us here, because you're definitely kind of older millennial. I'm younger millennial / whatever is after millennial. I don't know.
Yeah, we're Generation S, as you said. Yes.
We're Generation S. That's there right. It is. So, well, let me ask you, have you ever done an episode on Pee-wee before for your show?
I have not. I'm pretty sure he's probably on the list. I have an actual notebook with lists in it. And I believe he is on there because I just distinctly remember watching the show as a kid on Saturday morning. So not him specifically, but certainly he's been on the to-do list for sure.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, then this is exciting. This is your first time publicly talking about Pee Wee Herman with another individual. So very cool. Yep. Well, then why don't we go ahead and, we'll start with the movies, right? Because those kind of got people exposed on a national, mainstream level to Pee Wee Herman. But you may recall, if you are a bit older, he actually started off with a special on HBO where he played Pee Wee Herman, but it was definitely geared more towards adult audiences. Yep. He was childlike, but the situations he got himself in on the special were definitely not kid friendly. I don't want to say rated R necessarily, but they were adult themed, right? Yeah. Because I never watched it, but you said you did watch it?
I feel like I do have vague memories of watching it, because I feel like there was probably times where my family decided to have the free trial of HBO. So I'm sure at some point that was on some kind of rerun. So I think that was the special on HBO. I think that aired in, I want to say 1981. And that sort of picked up some momentum, and that led to him appearing on a lot of, Paul Reubens is appearing on various talk shows. He's on David Letterman quite frequently, eventually Jay Leno and stuff like that. So I think that sort of started to build some traction from that special on HBO, which then kind of led into the films coming out. So it's interesting because he did note in some interviews I was watching that he's indicated that in a lot of cases, usually it starts with a TV show, then it becomes a movie. But in his case with the Pee Wee Herman character, it started with movies, and then that led to a TV show, which I thought was an interesting observation.
Yes. Well, and I'll say it right now. Pee-wee's Big Adventure is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh, yes.
Hands down.
Absolutely.
Tim Burton directed it.
Yes.
And I love most of Tim Burton's work. I can't say I love all of his work, but especially the earlier 80s and 90s stuff. Untouchable in my opinion as far as just style, and it was amazing. So
it was really interesting. I heard him kind of explain a little bit of a backstory about how Tim Burton came to be the director. So the studio didn't really know who was going to be the director, and Paul Reubens, I guess, went to a library and found a literal book of directors and wrote down 100 names and gave it to the studio, and they narrowed it down to one person, and it was Tim Burton, and he actually didn't really know him all that well and wasn't really sure if he was going to be a good fit for the film. So he was actually kind of initially resistant to it, but Paul Reubens got some encouragement from some of his friends that had worked with him, and it really helped him be convinced that he should definitely have Tim Burton do it. And as we all know, that was a genius move, because that movie is a cult classic. It is fantastic. And I'm not a huge Tim Burton fan myself either, especially more recent stuff. I just can't quite get into it. But his directorial skills for this movie were, just outstanding. It's such a good movie that I'm quite certain we rented. Multiple times a year. I'm not sure why we didn't even just like own it, because we watched it so much.
Well, because VHS tapes were super expensive back in the day.
That's
you didn't
true.
just, it wasn't like, I'm trying to remember, because like by the time I remember buying VHS tapes, they probably were cheaper because, they were everywhere. But like back in the day when this movie would have come out, I remember tapes were probably like $40 or $50.
Yeah, easily.
And that was back in the 80s.
Right.
So like
easily, yeah.
You didn't own a lot of movies. And so that's why, when you got the VCR, you could record stuff off TV. That's what made it so popular. And so the first time I ever saw this was actually after I saw Pee-wee's Playhouse, which we'll obviously be talking about.
Yeah.
I saw this. I didn't realize this had come out first. Like I had no idea this was the first time you really saw Pee-wee Herman on the main stage.
Yeah.
But I watched it. I was like, this is incredible. Like because it's like it's a kid's movie. I mean, it really is. There's nothing. I mean, there's certainly like undertones of like over your head jokes type of deal.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
in general, like, it's a pretty innocent plot about Pee-wee trying to find his bike.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like there's not a lot of deep symbolism there.
Right.
But it's still hilarious. It's funny. It's dark and morbid sometimes. It's weird.
Yeah.
And you've got at the center of it all, you've got Pee-wee Herman, who, for my money, is one of the greatest TV characters like of all time. Like, I'm trying to think of how you would describe Pee-wee Herman to somebody who's never heard of Pee-wee Herman. Like,
yeah, it is.
I don't know.
It is hard to describe. Yeah, he's like well, Paul Reubens said that the character was based off of some kids that he went to summer camp with. And I don't quite know where the voice came from per se. Maybe that was another childhood thing, but yeah, it's kind of like a grown up kid who,
it's like a man child.
Exactly. The man child is one of the phrase that kept coming to mind. Right. Like, can I think of something else besides man? But yes,
but like not in like a gross or weird way. Like it's like, cause like you'll see like when I think of man child, I think of that guy that won't leave his parents' basement. That's like, you know what I mean? Like that's what I think of a man child, is that guy that just sits around and plays video games all day. This is like literally like the dude's living on his own.
Right.
He's a snappy dresser. He's just kind of quirky and likes childlike things.
Yeah. It's kind of
you know what I mean?
Yeah, kind of. They're not the same, but it's sort of like, I sort of liken it to Artie from Pete and Pete, just in the sense of like, it's an adult that kids can kind of look up to, find really funny, somebody that they could, spend time with and, laugh about stuff and maybe, pull some pranks on people or something. And it would just be really fun. And I think part of why we liked him so much too, is that one of my dad's childhood friends was kind of, not really like Pee-wee Herman, but like him in the sense that he kind of never grew up, and he was totally down to like play dinosaurs with us, or, he bought me, I think he's the one that bought me my Vanilla Ice doll. He was just very like into stuff that kids like, but not in a weird way. He just kind of never lost that part of himself that, wanted to play. And so I think that's part of why we ended up watching it a lot and liking it, because it kind of reminded us of him. And my dad loves to this day, loves Pee-wee Herman, loves Paul Reubens. So I think that he could see a lot of his friend in Pee-wee Herman. So I think, it's a man child, but not like Adam Sandler and The Wedding Singer, I Live in My Parents' Basement song.
That's kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah.
Or Billy Madison, right? Where it's just like, wow, this guy's despicable. It's like, no, it's charming.
Right.
He's quirky. It's like the best part of like childhood innocence.
Yes.
Like he doesn't lose the innocence of childhood. You know what I mean?
Right.
I guess maybe that's a good way to describe it too.
Yeah.
But,
it's like a grown up kid. And I think my favorite scene of that movie, and I'm sure you remember this part too, is at the very beginning. I really liked it because he had this whole elaborate system in his house.
Rube Goldberg machine?
Yes, that made his pancakes and cracked the eggs and stuff, and that hooked me right away. Is like, I loved stuff like that. I wanted to have something like that. I think I tried to rig something like that to like turn on my lights in my room, which was like super lame compared to this thing. But just the imaginative, silly stuff, like what kid wouldn't want to grow up and slide down a fire pole to get to their kitchen, all those things that like you think are just so cool as a kid somehow came to fruition in this movie, which I think is why kids and parents liked it so much.
Yeah, because it was. Yeah, I mean, one. It also made me think like, okay, is he like a secret genius that can invent things? Because like, I'm assuming he built that himself, right? This whole thing where he flips a switch or whatever, and he's getting ready for the day, and all of a sudden, like his breakfast is cooked through the magic of a Rube Goldberg machine,
Right.
And his house just looks like it's funny because when I saw it, I was like, this doesn't look like Pee Wee's Playhouse, but Pee Wee's Playhouse, I guess, is like a separate place that he goes,
Yeah.
versus his regular house, which is where he, you know what I mean, but. Yeah, I mean, it was wild. Like, I love the designs. It was a very, I mean, it was the 80s. Like, it was like very loud 80s design, right? Like what people picture the 80s looking like in their heads versus what it actually looked like, which is totally not the same. That's like, I think it's like a quintessential 80s cartoon house brought to life almost.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And okay, let me ask you this, because when he's eating his breakfast, he's got pancakes and then he's got Mr. T cereal.
Yes.
Was that a real cereal?
It was. Yes.
Okay.
And it was.
I never had it. Did you ever have it?
I didn't. No, it's very. I think it was a pretty short-lived thing, but that was pretty a very 70s/80s thing is to have cereal. So like when Family Matters was on, for example, and I don't even remember this, but I was alive and remember everything from when Family Matters was on TV. Is there was actually a cereal called Urkelos.
Oh, okay. I think I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think Pee Wee Herman even had a cereal. I think he had done a partnership with.
Wouldn't be surprised.
I think he did like a sugar-free cereal or whatever, because he was trying. Honestly, that was one thing I will say is just reading up on him in preparation for this was like he did a lot for kids, like charities and like just the well-being of kids. Like I think he was a smoker and like he never wanted to be photographed with a cigarette.
Yeah.
Like there's he did a lot of anti-drug type stuff. So he really did a lot. And I think that's one thing that made me really admire him, despite all of the, there's obviously controversy with him and like later in his life. But he just seems like such a good guy. You know what I mean? And so
definitely. Yeah.
I think So, but going back to the movie again, it's a basic. If you've never seen the movie, go see it because it's amazing. Yeah. But the general premise is Pee Wee Herman is living his life and he's got this favorite bicycle. It's like the coolest bike I've ever seen. It's got all kinds of cool stuff on it. It's basically the Batmobile on two wheels, as far as I'm concerned. And long story short, it gets stolen by his rich snobby friend named Francis.
Yep.
And he's got to go find it. So he ends up going on this crazy journey across the country to find his bike.
Yes.
He goes from fantastic landmarks in California, like those big dinosaurs in the desert that I remember from the movie The Wizard. I don't know if you ever saw that movie.
I loved The Wizard, yes. On my Nintendo episode way back, I talked about The Wizard too.
The Wizard. Oh, yeah.
So good.
So what are those they're like famous dinosaurs. Like.
Yeah, I think it's just like a dinosaur park and you can just go and take your picture by them and climb up them and, go up there with your lunchbox with your beloved photos of your long lost sibling and, place them there. So,
keep talking about California.
Yeah.
So, and then he goes to the Alamo. That's actually a big plot point of the film is he shows up at the Alamo and is very disappointed when the Alamo doesn't have a basement. And then ends up like in the climax, the penultimate scene, he is on a Hollywood backlot. And I feel like this was a trope back in the day where like guys would run through movie sets and there would be like movie scenes going on at the same time. I don't know. Like when I think of that type of trope, I think of this movie. I think of like Gremlins 2. Mm-hmm. I think of like Blazing Saddles, you know what I mean? So I think it was a kind of a cliche, but it's still hilarious because he was just riding his bike through the different sets or whatever. And then long story short, they want to make his whole story that we've been watching into a movie, but in the movie, his Pee Wee Herman's actually the movie within the movie, I should say.
Right.
Pee Wee Herman is actually played by, is it James Brolin? What's
gosh, I don't remember.
Josh, it's James Brolin, because Josh Brolin is the one who was in Goonies and played Thanos and all that stuff, and it was his dad that played Pee Wee Herman in the movie.
Wow, I completely forgot about who the actor was,
Yes.
Yeah.
And listen, we didn't even talk about another 90s icon that is in this movie.
Yeah.
Do you remember his girlfriend or his friend, whatever, Dottie, was played by Elizabeth Daily, who, if you know anything about Nickelodeon, know that she voiced Tommy Pickles in Rugrats.
Oh, God, that's right.
So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, one of the best scenes of that movie is when he loses his bike and then runs into the store where she works and screams Dottie and honks a horn and then passes out, which is just, there's so many good one-liners from this movie. And I know that anytime like a basement is referred to, I always go to, everybody knows there's no basement in the Alamo.
Yes.
It's just so quotable. Such a quotable movie.
Oh, God. No, it is. It's an amazing movie. Now, there was a sequel that I admit I've never seen all the way through. It's called Big Top Pee-wee. Did you ever see that one?
Yes, I did see it, but the ratio of watching Pee-wee's Big Adventure to Big Top Pee-wee was certainly a huge, drastic difference. So I don't remember that movie quite as well, but I think compared, the Pee-wee's Big Adventure is, the standard, and the bar was so high that I think it would be impossible for anything to reach that. So certainly the plot kind of odd, and kind of didn't work as well as Pee-wee's Big Adventure, but
it was something, and again, because I've never seen it all the way through, but I basically, like, he joins a circus, or he meets up with a circus, and there's something
circus comes to the town where he lives. He lives on a farm and has befriends a pig.
It's a different house than he was living in Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Yeah, he lives in a farmhouse, is still clad in his outfit, which doesn't seem like appropriate farm wear. I mean, I'm no expert, but the suit, I don't think
very impractical.
Yeah, it's very impractical for farming and all that good stuff. So so he has a fiance, I think, and then the circus literally comes to town, and he falls for a trapeze artist, and I think he ends up performing in the circus too. It just is quite bizarre. So, and I'm not a fan of circuses and clowns and stuff, so that I avoid.
Oh well, okay, yeah.
So
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
Because I mean, going back to Pee-wee's Big Adventure, there is some scary moments in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I mean, I think if you were to go on YouTube and type in Pee-wee Large Marge, that scene is kind of terrifying.
Yes.
As a kid, I mean, I was scared. It wasn't super scary or anything like that, but it definitely made me jump.
Yeah.
And if you've seen it, if you know, like if you've seen that one scene, you know what I'm talking about with Large Marge.
Right.
But that's all. I don't want to spoil it in case you are planning, you the listener are planning to go watch this movie that you have not seen yet for some reason.
Right.
So now, did Big Top Pee-wee come out still before Pee-wee's Playhouse?
It came out during. I think so. Pee-wee's Playhouse started in 1986, and I think Big Top Pee-wee came out in 1988. So it's kind of like midway through the TV show's run. So,
gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good transition then. Let's talk about, I mean, really the reason most of us that are of this generation know Pee Wee Herman as the mainstream icon is from Pee-wee's Playhouse. It's funny because I asked my wife, because I gave her first dibs, I said, do you want to do an episode with me about Paul Reubens? And she goes, I was not allowed to watch Pee-wee's Playhouse as a kid.
Huh.
So I don't know why. She said, because there was that controversy. I was like, yeah, that didn't come out until the late 90s, well after this show, though.
Yeah.
And so my guess is her parents just thought he was obnoxious or annoying or something, and that's why she was. Because I'll say this, as a parent, there are certainly shows that I try to have my kids not watch around me because they're kind of annoying.
Right.
I never found Pee Wee Herman annoying, but maybe my parents would have. I was allowed to watch it, though, so I don't know.
Yeah.
But Pee-wee's Playhouse, as you said, came out in 1986. It went for, 6 seasons, I think, or something like that?
Yep, until the first sort of initial, unfortunate scandal.
Yeah.
That's what kind of ended
right.
it. Yeah, probably would have, I imagine it would have probably gone on for longer, too, but...
I think so. I mean, it had legs. It was the premise was pretty simple. You had it was basically like the old 60s and 70s Captain Kangaroo and all these Romper Room and all that stuff, where you had Pee Wee Herman, who people may or may not have known from the movies, but still he was he hangs out at his playhouse. He's got all kinds of zany stuff going on, and but it's educational, right? Every episode you definitely learn some stuff. You learn the secret word, which I still love to this day. The secret word.
Me too.
It's I was thinking actually before we started recording, I was like, should we do the secret word? But I'm like, no, I just feel like I don't want to scream too much tonight. So I didn't want to, But the secret word, you had the remember the King of Cartoons?
Yep.
And with where he would show old cartoons that I didn't realize were some of them are iconic cartoons that are super famous. I knew them from Pee-wee's Playhouse. Yeah. They were the old Disney cartoons or Merry Melodies maybe. I forget whatever ones, but they were probably public domain cartoons at the time or whatever.
Yes, yep, and stock cartoons. Yeah, I kind of insert himself into those, which was pretty comical, and he used to do that a bit on some of the talk shows that he would go on to. I was watching some old clips of him on David Letterman, and he did kind of something similar, which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
It's pretty creative.
So I'm trying to. What are some other segments that like were because I'm going to be honest with you. There's only one specific episode that I can remember, other than like the Christmas special, which in and of itself was a very unique thing. But like as far as like the regular series, there's only one episode I remember watching from start to finish at this point in my memory. Because I don't think you can really. Well, I guess you could stream it on Netflix for a while, and I just didn't.
Yeah.
But
there's
what are some?
Yeah, there's a fair amount of them on YouTube, which,
Yeah.
I bet now that he's passed away, those will get pulled down. But I remember there's a lot of segments that had to do with, one with like kind of inserting himself into the old TV clips, but then also stuff with clay animation. So there was a character named Penny.
Oh, the Penny cartoons.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
I remember that.
Yep. So that was a segment. And then I think a lot of it also had to do with like him interacting with some of his friends that were on the show, like the mail lady and the genie, I think his name was Jambi.
Jambi.
Jambi, thank you. I knew I was gonna goof up the vowel on that one. So there's that, and I'm trying to remember.
Do you remember there was one character that was on quite a bit, Cowboy Curtis?
Yes,
do you remember him?
I do.
Do you remember who he was played by?
I do. Lawrence Fishburne.
Lawrence, aka Morpheus from The Matrix.
I know, it's so crazy.
So that's wild.
Yeah.
And of course he had like all of his talking furniture, right? You had Cherry.
Yep.
You had Globy. Mm-hmm. That was a very clever name, of course.
Yeah.
You had Conky the robot.
Yes.
You had Dog Chair. You had Flory, I think it was.
Yep.
I think he had like a talking floor.
Yeah.
You had a weird, creepy ventriloquist dummy that reminded me way too much of Chucky called Randy.
Yeah.
One thing I remember from the show, this was always fun, was every time he would open his fridge, there'd be like a show being performed inside the fridge with all the food, like claymation, stop motion.
Yeah.
And he would like tell him like, hey, keep it down.
Right.
And he would close the door again. So I always loved that. He would sometimes jump on like video calls because, of course, very futuristic house. He had video call capabilities back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And he would put on like some kind of weird hat, and then he would pick up a can and he would talk onto the TV and call somebody. It was different every time.
Yeah. I know, just all these little hokey little things, and it's kind of interesting to see it through an adult's eyes now. And I find a lot of it to be really entertaining and really funny, and just his observational humor, I think, really worked very well in the show. So I remember a character named Terry, who was his sidekick, Pterodactyl, who was like teal in color, and I think flew around at the opening credits of the show, I want to say. So that was another one of his good friends. And then there was also, which I totally forgot about this, but Phil Hartman was on the first season of the show. He played a character named Captain Carl.
Oh.
And, yeah, which totally forgot about that. But they actually met at the Groundlings, which is an improv comedy troupe school program that's in California.
Yeah.
So they met during that time, and also Paul Reubens and Kathy Griffin were good friends, and they met there as well, which I thought was pretty cool. I did a show on Kathy Griffin, another kind of long back catalog episode, which was really interesting, but she put a really nice post up about him and their friendship and stuff like that. Yeah. And I'm trying to think. Then I think there's Miss Yvonne, played by Lynn Marie Stewart, who kind of, I think, was dressed like very 1950s in her kind of dresses, and her hair stuck out, and she had it styled very perfectly, never wanted it to get wet or messy. So certainly there's even more than that. I mean, there's just tons and tons of.
Well, and then there was just the actual, like, he would bring celebrity guests on the show, right? You know, like playing themselves. Like I'm thinking like mainly of like the Christmas special where he had like Oprah on there. He had Whoopi Goldberg. He had Joan Rivers on there, I think. You had what is her name? Is it Charo? Is that her name?
Oh yeah. Yeah, she wrote a tribute about him.
Oh, she did? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess Paul Reubens identified Joan Rivers as actually being a mentor to him. Somebody that he really looked up to and took a lot of inspiration from, which I thought was really cool. And I think it's really nice, especially during the 70s and 80s, where I feel like women had a really hard time kind of getting into stand-up comedy and being respected by their male counterparts. I think he really kind of broke the mold of that and being really supportive and encouraging of his female comedian friends, which I think just adds to the
absolutely
the cool factor of seemed
Paul
like a pretty
Reubens.
Cool guy. Yeah.
Well, and and this, we're not talking about Joan Rivers today, but a fun fact, you mentioned that. So there's a show on Amazon Prime called The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Have you seen that show?
I've seen a few episodes of it, but not.
So
not
supposedly that is like a lot of that is based off of Joan Rivers' career.
Wow.
Yeah, so I learned that
Huh.
near the end of the series, but I was just doing some research, and apparently a lot of those elements were based on like the struggles that Joan Rivers had gone through in like the 50s and the 60s.
Wow.
So I thought that was kind of cool. Anyway,
Yeah.
so but really cool that Paul Reubens was definitely, you know, an admirer of hers, and again brought her on the show, and it was just so.
Yeah.
As far as Pee-wee's Playhouse, the only episode I can remember was one where Pee-wee meets a monster.
Hmm.
Do you remember this one?
Doesn't ring a bell, but it sounds like a Pee-wee's Playhouse episode for sure.
Well, so basically, the entire first part of the episode, everyone's like running away scared, like, "Oh, there's a monster on the loose," and Pee-wee's like, "There's no such thing as monsters." That's my really bad Pee-wee Herman impression, and so.
Better than I could do.
But yeah, anyway, long story short, he ends up meeting this monster who is a giant one-legged, one-eyed monster, which again, for the adults listening to this, like, yeah, he encountered a one-eyed monster.
Yeah.
But his name was Roger, and the problem was he was just making weird gibberish monster sounds until Pee-wee, you know, goes, you know, to Jambi, the genie head, and says, "I need to understand this monster." And so basically they just make it so that he speaks English instead. And all of a sudden he's like, "Hello, my name's Roger," and they're just interacting with him. And he's like, "Well, you want to stay for dinner, Roger?" "I gotta go home, Pee-wee." And so like it turns out that I think the moral of the story was that like, hey, even the scariest things, you know, aren't so scary once you get to know them.
Yeah.
And so I think because there was always like a lesson to be learned, you know, with each episode.
Right.
You
could learn what you could do with, yeah, definitely. And you could also learn like what to do with a giant pair of underwear.
I mean,
That's
the possibilities are endless, but yes,
it is.
Absolutely.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So the Christmas special, because I wanted to give it its own time here on this episode. Did you watch have you seen the Christmas special?
I remember watching it, but the details of it are escaping me. But
Okay.
anything Pee-wee Herman related, if it was on TV, we were going to watch it. Come hell or high water. If
Absolutely.
Pee-wee Herman was on, my dad was, yeah.
So
watch it.
Pee-wee Herman's Christmas special got super famous like 10 or 15 years ago. Like, I don't know if it was because it was considered a meme or whatever, but I had never seen it until then. And then I put it on. It was on Netflix at the time. And I watched it. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, it's hilarious. Like, the whole premise is Pee-wee Herman is wanting to like get everything he can from Santa Claus, right? He just wants he wants all the gifts, and all his friends keep bringing him gifts, and he's so excited. And then they all end up bringing him a fruitcake, which is like, I guess that was a thing back. I haven't heard about it much these days, but back in the day, apparently fruitcake was like the worst Christmas gift you could get or something.
Yeah.
Which I don't know why. I actually kind of like fruitcake, so I don't know why people are getting so up in arms about it. But so anyway, long story short, he meets Santa Claus, and he's like, "Yeah, I want all the gifts." And Santa's like, "All right, well, fine. If I give you all the gifts, then no one else gets any presents. But if that's what you want," and like he feels bad, he's all right, fine. Just we'll go give the gifts to the other kids and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of celebrities in it. I mentioned Charo, Joan Rivers, Oprah.
Wow.
So it's just, and it's fun. There's definitely some 80s celebrities that I don't remember. So I can't remember them now either. But it was really cool. So I wanted it, and when it got off Netflix, I ended up finding it like on iTunes, and I bought it. And so now every year at Christmas time, that is part of our like Christmas specials rotation that we do. You know what I mean? With
nice.
different,
I gotta add. Yeah, I'm gonna need to add that to the list, because anything that involves Oprah, Joan Rivers, sign me up, because
it's terrific. And Whoopi Goldberg is in it. I think she's I forget why she's on there, but she's trying to like get on Pee-wee show or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's a good one. My kids love it too. So it's not just for me. It's for them, obviously. So so Pee-wee's Playhouse, obviously the reason we are talking here today, but that doesn't mean it's the only reason we're talking here today, because he was certainly in a number of films and animated series and all this kind of stuff after the fact. What are some of your favorite memories of him, not as Pee-wee Herman, as far as other characters in movies or shows?
Yeah, I think my favorite appearance that he made was on 30 Rock. So I'm a huge 30 Rock Tina Fey fan. And so he made an appearance as this really bizarre like prince on the show. And he had like really pale makeup on and sort of this like regal suit on, and his character was just so odd. And I think he had like really teeny tiny hands and like white gloves, and like was sweating a lot. And
I think I remember that. Yeah.
So it was just, it was just so much different than Pee-wee, who's certainly an obscure character for sure, but just completely different than what we're used to kind of seeing him as. And I think it was executed very well because he was very awkward, very unlikable, very just a strange human that you would not want to sit next to at a dinner party. And he did it brilliantly. So I'd say that was my favorite role of his.
So I have a couple. There's a couple of movies I'm going to bring up, and you tell me if you've seen him, if you remember that he was in them, whatever. Let's start with a big one, Matilda.
Yep.
So do you remember him in that?
Yes, I do. Yes, starring in Matilda was played by the young woman who was in Mrs. Doubtfire, I believe.
Yeah, Mara Wilson.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you. Yeah, that is correct. Yes. Yep.
And so Paul Reubens played one of the police officers or FBI or whatever that was investigating all of the misdeeds of Matilda's parents, and so hilarious, small bit part, but hilarious.
Yeah.
I feel like he does really well in small bit parts. Another one that comes to mind is another obscure 90s movie that I love. Like every time I saw it on TV, I'd watch it. It was called Dunstan Checks In. Do you remember this movie?
I do remember this movie. I believe the name, I'm not going to get the name, but I believe the little boy that was in that movie was in the Santa Claus.
Yeah, he played Charlie in the Santa Claus movies. And again, I don't remember his name either. I feel really bad. I should have looked it up. But
I know. I want to say it's Eric something. Don't ask me why I think it's that.
I was going to say the same thing actually. So
yeah.
So it's about this little boy whose dad runs a hotel. So he basically lives in the hotel and meets a pet orangutan that escapes from a really mean owner.
Yeah.
And so Paul Reubens' character is basically this like animal hunter. He's basically like the bad guy version of Ace Ventura. Where that's what I would equate him to, where he's basically hunting for Dunstan in this hotel, and he's just it's hilarious. So like I'll actually I'll quote him every once in a while, or like I'll be looking around the house for something, and my wife will be like, "What are you looking for?" I'll be like, "I'm looking for a Pongo pygmaeus." Because apparently that is like whatever the Latin is for orangutan, and so he throws it out there. And so anyway, It's a very obscure quote that most people listening to this probably have no idea, but it's a funny movie. Go see it.
Yeah, you'd be surprised.
Another one that he had a bit of a larger role in is another one of my favorite movies from the late 90s. It's called Mystery Men. Did you ever see that movie?
I did not see that. I'm familiar with it, but I have not seen it.
Okay, so Mystery Man, basically it's like it's a superhero movie about these ragtag superheroes that have to save this big main macho superhero. I think he's called Captain Amazing, or I honestly can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I do love it. And Paul Reubens plays a superhero called the Spleen, and his superpowers is that he can fart strong enough to knock people out. That's literally his only superpower. And
my dad would definitely like that movie then. So I'll pass that along. Paul Reubens and flatulence.
No, it's fantastic. So it stars Ben Stiller as the main superhero.
Oh geez, man, that's like going to be next on my to watch list. If Ben Stiller's
and then
in
Greg Kinnear plays Captain Amazing.
Nice.
And then Casanova Frankenstein, that's the name of the villain. He is played by Jeffrey Rush, who is also Captain Barbossa in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Wow.
So I can't believe you've never seen this movie.
No, this is like a who's who of.
Yeah,
I mean,
and Kel Mitchell's in it from Kenan and Kel.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah. It's all coming back.
And then what's it? The comedian? Who's the female comedian? Shorter with dark hair. God, she was like super famous in the 90s.
Janeane Garofalo.
Yes, Janeane Garofalo's in it.
Okay. Well,
so
all right.
It is a who's who. You need to watch this movie and report back to me, please.
I will. Yeah, that'll be the next. Podcast episode guest appearance.
Absolutely.
We can examine this thoroughly.
It's a good one. Yeah. So that's one. So here we go. The most obscure thing I ever saw Paul Reubens in was from a show that I didn't watch it when it came out because it was on like Showtime or something back in the 80s, but I rented it at the library because you could rent movies at the library back. You still can, but the show was called Fairy Tale Theater. Do you remember this show?
That sounds familiar.
It was hosted by Shelley Duvall in every episode.
Yes, they were very close friends.
Yes.
And she was the one, sorry to going off the rail here for a second, but she was one of the people that really encouraged Paul Reubens to be open to working with the director for Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Oh, Tim Burton.
Yeah. So once she kind of confided in him that he was really, a gifted director, then that kind of sealed the deal for him. So, but anyways, back to
Yeah.
Back to what
So,
you're saying.
so do you remember the show though? Where
I
she
do.
would yeah. So like
Yes.
every episode was a different fairy tale, basically. So you had like the Three Little Pigs. You had Aladdin. You had like the Princess and the Pea. So he played. He was in the episode Pinocchio, and so he played Pinocchio.
Oh God, that's right.
And
God,
and so
that's
I tried to,
weird.
there's a few other people in that episode in particular that were like they ended up being very famous. The main one was Michael Richards. Kramer from Seinfeld was one of like the thugs or whatever that kidnaps Pee-wee. And so so as far as like the most obscure thing I've ever seen Paul Reubens in, that would be it.
Yeah.
And like if you're listening to this and you've never heard of Fairy Tale Theater, like go find it. I think it's on YouTube. And it's out there. Like the first episode they ever did, just as an example, was like The Princess and the Frog, and the frog was played by Robin Williams. So like they had a lot of famous people. Like Christopher Reeve was in an episode.
Wow.
Yes, I mean Jeff Goldblum played the big bad wolf in The Three Little Pigs.
Wow.
And then so it's a fantastic show. Like it's like I don't know. I can't hype it up anymore. It's very good. So
yeah, I definitely remember that.
Yeah, that's like I said. That's probably the most obscure thing I ever saw Paul Reubens in. But and I didn't really, I know he did like a lot of like cartoon animated stuff. I just never saw it, so I don't know. And then I know he actually had. I still haven't seen it, but have you seen that Netflix movie he did, Pee-wee's like Big Holiday or whatever it is?
No, I didn't. I think that came out in 2016, and you know, there's a lot of kind of stuff in the works on the sort of the docket to sort of bringing the character back, and I think people were really receptive to Pee-wee becoming a character again, and I think the movie was pretty well received from what I was reading, but I did not see that, unfortunately, but maybe somebody has uploaded it somewhere that I can watch.
Well, it's on Netflix. I mean, if you have Netflix, it's still on Netflix.
It's still there. Okay.
It should, because it's like a Netflix original, so who knows? But no, I think I saw clips of it, but I've never seen the whole thing. I've heard it's actually really good, though. Like, it's like, if you like Pee-wee's Big Adventure in particular, this one is definitely kind of up that alley. So it's on my list, and maybe now, especially with everything that's happened, I will watch it sooner than later. As a tribute to Paul Reubens.
Yeah, and it's amazing that when he played Pee-wee, all these years later, after becoming a popular character in the early 1980s, that he still looked relatively young. You'd think somebody playing the same character that they played 30 years earlier would look like an old, just an old dude playing Wee Herman. But it's amazing how he was still able to sort of capture that same energy despite being a chain smoker and being 30, 40 years older than he was when the character was so well known.
I mean, he never, here's the thing, he never really got fat, right? So that's like the first thing you notice when somebody that's older plays a character is like they gain weight, like a little bit, like his face maybe got a little puffier or whatever, but like for the most part he maintained relatively decent physique. And then like his hair, I think his hair maybe was thinning, so maybe he wore like a hair piece, but again, that's not, it's more so like the face. And of course the thing with Pee-wee is he always had makeup on, right? Like that was, I don't know if that was like intentional, like you're supposed to know he has makeup, or if it's like you're not, I don't know, but he always had the very kind of white face with the dark red lips. So when you've got makeup on and you're relatively thin always, like, and the voice, I mean, even the voice, it sounded a little bit older, but I think he still had it in him even at the end there with the Pee-wee voice. Yeah,
it's so amazing how he was able to create that character. And I think it was something that kind of came out of the whole Groundlings thing, because I think he felt like he would never be a traditional stand-up comedian. So kind of being in character was just kind of his shtick, and he stuck with it until the end, which was pretty impressive.
Yeah. And I mean, I hope, people will now be going back and watching this, all of his work if they hadn't already, Pee-wee and otherwise, because he does have a fantastic body of work and he really is a brilliant actor. And so I just hope that with everything that it's unfortunate that something like this has to happen for people to go, oh, you know what? Yeah, I did appreciate him, or I'm going to go check out his stuff. And I'm guilty of it too. Cause again, there's a lot of stuff I haven't seen that I'm going to go watch now because, well, it's just, I never did. And now is as good a time as any.
Yeah.
And so,
definitely.
Well, it's the end of an era. It's the end of an icon. I don't know how you want to put it, but, rest in peace, Paul Reubens.
Yeah. Absolutely. And hang on to those Pee-wee Herman dolls.
Right. I never had one. Did you have one?
I did not know. I'm sure that I would have wanted one because we had a lot of sort of interesting, iconic dolls of the era, from a Michael Jackson, figure to Vanilla Ice. But unfortunately, the Pee Wee Herman doll is not in the collection. That and I didn't have an Urkel doll either.
I was just going to ask you, did you have a Steve Urkel doll? But no. Okay.
I didn't know. But apparently when Pee Wee Herman, when the show was at its peak, I think the merchandise between the dolls and some clothing and a couple other things, it was like a multi-million-dollar.
Oh yeah.
Business or whatever, and sales was kind of crazy, which makes a lot of sense. And I think even prior to his death, that the Pee Wee doll, I think, is a pretty big collectible item for nostalgia nerds like ourselves, who I'm sure pay quite a lot for an original Pee Wee Herman, doll in the box and all that good stuff. So,
yeah. No, I never had the Pee Wee doll. I never Urkel. You know what I did have though? Totally off topic here, but did you ever have the Beetlejuice doll?
No. Do
you remember this? Did you ever see it?
It sounds familiar. But didn't have it. Maybe my cousins did, but.
Well, so it was very similar in size to the Pee Wee doll. It was soft, but had like a hard head. And what you could do is you could spin his head around.
Oh God!
And then you push his back, and then his head would spin really fast. Like that was his big thing. Nice. I think he had a pull string as well. That he would talk. That was the big thing, right?
You have to,
talking. So I think he did that. But I didn't really have. I didn't have a Pee Wee doll. I didn't have a Vanilla Ice or Freddy Krueger. I know that was another doll that was really popular. I didn't have him. I just had Beetlejuice. But there was a ton of merchandise for Pee Wee Herman. It was at its peak was like, I'd say it probably rivaled maybe not Ninja Turtles popularity, but it was up there.
Right.
Like there was Pee Wee everywhere.
Right. Yeah. Such a unique character. And I think it's one of the staying power too. It's sort of one of those things from the 80s that, it's from the 80s, like, it's kind of dated, but at the same time you can go back and watch it as an adult and it's not like torturous to watch it. It's actually really funny and super creative and super funny. So, hopefully there'll be another generation of kids and young people that are interested in it, because it certainly has some staying power.
Yeah. There's not a lot of shows from 30 years ago that I can say, like, this holds up. And this show, Pee Wee's Playhouse, holds up. Everything Pee Wee Herman has done holds up, in my opinion.
Right.
And again, I could be biased because of my age, but I truly think, again, my kids have watched it. They like it. So I don't think it's just me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And do you find yourself, if you were ever at, let's say, like a wedding or something like that, if the song Tequila comes on, do you feel the need to
Am I doing the dance? You better believe I'm doing the dance. Yeah. I don't have a pair of like giant platform shoes to really pull it off, but
I know, me neither.
I make do with what I've got. And yes. Yeah. I know it's funny because I made a note here. It's like, all right, make sure you shout out the song Tequila before we jump off. So that's perfect. Yeah. So go listen to the song Tequila. It's the easiest song to do in karaoke ever. So like it's a great song. Yeah, right. It's the best song for karaoke. And the best song to dance to, because you can probably pull off both at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep that in mind. The next time most of my friends are all already married, or, that's just or not going to get married, which is totally fine. But, I think the next time I am slated to go to a wedding, I'm going to find a humongous pair of, white loafers and shove them in my trunk just in case, God forbid, that song comes on, so that I'm ready to go. Because that would be a crying shame to not have the attire and the footwear if that song came on.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, bring $10 with you, too, and guarantee the song get played. Just tip the DJ, man. You're good to go.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Play it in like 5 minutes. I need to go around to my car.
And, just give me a second. I got to get the tie on and everything like that. Because those bow ties, man, they're not easy to tie. So you got to get like either the clip on or whatever. But
that's true.
All right. Well, I think we've done justice to Paul Reubens today. If you're listening to this and there's memories you want to share, just make sure you reach out to us on social media. Shoot us a message at generation. I think it's generation_S_podcast or .s. I don't remember. Just search Generation S podcast. I promise you it shows up. I suck at this. I'm so not good at social media plugging. You are so much better than me, Amy, with what you do with your social media than I am.
I try, but it's like a full-time job, really.
It is.
And it's fun, and I'm not saying that it's like, 'cause I enjoy it, but it's certainly it's a lot to take care of, for sure.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
And then I've got, I've got this podcast. I've got another podcast now that I'm doing. So I'll give that a quick plug. Hold on a second here. If you like scary movies and if you like drinking beer, check out Beer Before Fear. It is a podcast about craft beer and scary movie reviews. So make sure you check that out. We are on episode 3 that just came out last week. A Nightmare on Elm Street is what we covered. So if you're into scary movies and or drinking really good beer, it's a podcast for you. So anyway, there's my quick plug there. But again, super busy with that. I've got this. I do work for another kids podcast network. So I'm all over the podcasting world right now. But that means that I kind of suck at the other part of podcast promotion and I need to get a lot better. Even with, we got our YouTube channel as well, putting out weekly content for YouTube. It's a lot. Like if I got paid to do this and this was my full-time job, I'd be in heaven. But unfortunately it's not. So I'm having to do this outside of regular work hours to get everything done.
Right.
But,
it's a labor of love.
It is. And listen, hey, if you like what you're listening, you, the listener, if you like what you're listening to, and you want to hear more of this stuff, make sure you're leaving that positive review on iTunes or leaving that 5-star review on Spotify, because the more people that listen to this, the more there is a possibility that I could get paid to do this for a living. I don't think it's going to happen, but I'd love for it to happen. And you can be a part of that just by telling a friend about the show, leaving a review, and go buy a t-shirt. I've got a link to the merch. I always forget to plug the merch thing too. I suck at this, Amy. So you got to check out the merch.
It's hard. Yeah. Wait, there's like a level of guilt to it. You feel kind of guilty, but it's like, but you're pouring so much work and into the show. So it's, you got to plug it.
You do. It's true. Well, and again, that's why
important.
Once again,
let's
let's give our listeners access to your show. It's Pop Culture Retrospective Podcast at popcultureretrospective.com or on any of your major
There's
podcast
merch there
outlets.
Too.
You've got merch. See, she's got merch.
I've got a link to the merch there. Yes.
Yeah, no, we're out here. We're doing this thing, and it's a labor of love. It's fun.
It is.
But anyway, that's going to wrap it up for this week's episode, guys. Thank you so much for listening, and Amy, as always, thank you for coming on the show. I will absolutely bring you back on again for a 3-peater.
Nice. And likewise, you're always
I'd love to come back on your
my show too.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I actually, so if you're a regular listener of this show, you probably noticed 2 weeks ago I was on vacation, so I had to throw up an episode that I did with Amy on her show where we talked all about Nickelodeon. So that was great. I appreciate you getting that to me so that we could pop that up on here, and hopefully it brought some listeners to your page for the other stuff. So
definitely collaborating and meeting other podcasters is one of the best things.
It's awesome.
And meeting
I
listeners.
love talking to podcasters on the show. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good deal. We're cut from the same cloth. So.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. Amy, once again, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Yes. And with that, we'll talk to you soon.
Goodbye.